So, Meir, you want to start?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending where you are. If you're in Israel, it's morning. And if you're in diaspora in Eastern Standard Time, it's around 12 midnight. Welcome to the Never Again live show. I'm Meir Weinstein with Baruch Ben-Yoseph. Baruch Ben-Yoseph is live from the Temple Mount. We're going to be discussing the Torah Parsha of this week, which is Shoftim. And it says, judges and police officers, you shall appoint for yourselves in all of your cities that God, your God, is giving you for your tribes. Baruch, it's very interesting that, that the Parsha talks about the judges, how we appoint the judges, and that seems to be a big issue right now in Israel, that Jews are talking about judicial reform, the selection of judges. What can you tell us about the Parsha as we move forward?
So we're about to go in. Nice crowd today because it's Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, of course, last month of the Jewish year. Before we begin the period of the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. And of course, it begins the period of of atonement. You know, the Sephardic Jews start saying Slichot already from Sunday, from the beginning of Elul, and the Ashkenazi Jews was in the last week of Elul. But Slichot, of course, is a very it's a later addition that was added on much later on. Obviously, there's nothing, no mention of it in the Talmud, in the Torah, in the Talmud. Okay, so we're now just entered the Temple Mount. We can see here, very nice crowd today.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, I just made myself a cup of coffee. I'm gonna make a bracha here on the Temple Mount. Everybody can answer Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nivaro.
Amen.
Okay, that gets us going. So of course, Shoftim is the portion, and it's very relevant to today, more relevant than ever. A lot we can learn, and especially since the issues at hand here in Israel is this conflict between the judicial system and the legislature, the Knesset, the government, the executive body, the executive branch. Obviously, I'm sure most of the people that are listening or watching live in a democratic country which has the checks and balances, right, between the different branches of government. That's the whole basis of the system, that nobody has absolute power. So you have the executive branch, whether it's a president or a prime minister, and they're supposed to run the show as long as they do things according to the law. When they need to legislate a law, was there's the parliament, the Knesset, or the Congress, or the Senate, and they legislate laws as are needed. Sometimes they legislate too much laws that aren't needed, but and then there's a judicial branch which is supposed to oversee that besides obviously people that need to be put on trial or lawsuits and so on, but as far as overseeing the other branches of government, to make sure that they're making decisions that they're making, the laws that they're making are according to the Constitution. Now, there are countries like Israel don't have a constitution. They have, in Israel, what's called basic law. Basic law is a law legislated by the Knesset, but it's not considered actually the Knesset that's legislating the basic law. It's actually considered um, the the original committee that created the state of Israel at the time in 1948, that they
Right.
like reconvene when they make a basic law, and so it has a much higher uh, level of importance than a regular law. And a basic law is supposed to be something that the that this that the courts don't intervene with. In other words, there's a basic law, and that's like constitution. So they don't intervene in that. But the laws that are legislated are supposed to be according to the rules of the basic law, which is supposedly the Constitution. And even the Supreme Court has stated in the past that they cannot intervene and change or decide that a basic law is not constitutional. But but now, of course, since everything is on the table now, that's what's going on. Is that the Supreme Court is going to hear these cases coming up in September about whether they can intervene on matters of basic law as it relates to the executive branch and the legislature. So interesting times. We're living in interesting times. Things are happening really fast. Things are coming to a head. It's important to understand something before we get into the portion. Is that originally, when the socialist Zionists basically took control of the state when it first started in 1948, they had the judicial branch in check. It basically it knew its place. It didn't overstep its bounds. It had a lot more respect at the time because it knew its place. And it was Begin actually, when the first right-wing government in 1977, when he came to power, he's the one who gave the judicial branch the power that it took to basically take control. I mean, if there's Israel, I would say, is a dictatorship run by the courts.
Mhm.
Definitely not a democracy. I mean, people go to vote in an election, and then the people that make the decisions are the courts. That's what's been happening because of Begin's decision back in 1977, and he should have expected that the courts are not going to just sit by and not take advantage of the power that he enabled them to have. So that's why we have this situation today in Israel. The courts have taken so much power that they are like a dictatorship, to the point where now the left wing, it's like all reversed. The right wing is fighting to take away the power from the courts, and the left wing, which is so used to now having the courts intervene all the time, since now the left is no longer the majority and the right wing is a majority, so they don't want the results of elections to determine what decisions and policy and so on. So they rely on the courts to do that for them, because obviously it's not judges aren't elected by popular vote, and that's why we have now this dichotomy. We have instead of the right wing, which relied on the courts at the time because the left wing socialists were denying them their rights. Now it's the opposite. Now it's the left wing, the anarchists, the extreme left wing that are fighting for the court against the government. So that, in a nutshell, is what's going on. Let me ask you, Mayor, are people following? I mean, do they understand what's going on here in Israel, or they're just getting sucked into the fake news that they hear?
Well, I mean, I can answer from the perspective in Toronto. The Toronto Jewish community hasn't caught up to the American Jewish community. It's less assimilated percentage-wise and more traditional in the Toronto Jewish community. So I would say probably the majority of Jews in Toronto like Bibi, like Netanyahu, and it's more of a fringe in the community that is taking part in these protests against the government and using terminology like dictatorship and nonsense like that, and hugging, breaking the silence, groups like that, the extreme left, the New Israel Fund. That doesn't represent the majority of Jews in Toronto, but that certainly does have a strong effect in the American Jewish community with J Street and the such. So, but you know, I mean, Toronto will eventually. I don't like to see this, but it will certainly catch up with the United States. I remember Rabbi Kahana used to say, Toronto Jews or Canadian Jews lag behind, are 5 years behind the American community.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, all right. Anyhow, I was just wondering what people are, are people under, are they getting the real news, or are they all just getting the fake stuff that the CNN or those guys sell them? So
I'm not
anyhow,
really sure who they even follow, who the people follow, because I don't even turn on the TV to get my news. I get my news from news sources that I have on the internet. Twitter's quick. There's different bloggers and different people that I'm associated with on the right, so I read the stuff quickly before it's even broadcast.
the cop just warned him. He say, see, under the Netanyahu Ben-Gvir government, it's become a lot worse here than it was under Bennett and Lapid.
Really? Wow.
It's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. You can't rely on anybody. I tell you, when they get to the government, the only guy you could rely on is Rabbi Kahana. He got booted out. So,
right.
I guess that's the litmus test. If you aren't booted out of the Knesset, then you're no good. I mean,
and Rabbi Kahana, he said, we proved we're right.
Right. Exactly.
And that's it, because everything was based on Torah. There was nothing. I mean, it's unbelievable that there's a Knesset member, an Arab Knesset member, Ahmed Tibi, and he goes to Jenin and he gives a speech there and he praises the so-called martyrs after there's a mobilization of the IDF to go into Jenin and have some operation there to clean up a source of terrorism there, as limited as the operation was. But nonetheless, you have this Arab MK that goes and joins the side there, and he's still a Knesset member with all the benefits.
Look, they had a Knesset member years ago. He got caught spying on Israel.
Right.
His name was Azmi Bashara. He had a runaway, and he was still getting benefits from the Knesset, even though he ran away. He was getting his pension. And he was like, what is going on here? What is insanity? I mean, the stories we talk about Chelm, the stories of Chelm, the Jews of Chelm. But Chelm is alive and well here in Israel. It's just unbelievable things that go on.
Yep.
Most ridiculous. It's like Rabbi Kahana would say, I could forgive Jews for not being good Jews, but I can't forgive them for being bad human beings, not normal human beings. That's unforgivable. Oh, wait, we have a statement here.
It's not a matter of Chelm, it's a matter of not giving a damn. Oh. That's what it comes down to. That's what you have most of the Jews over there, so-called Jews in overseas, and a great many of them here. And that's what it comes down to. They couldn't care less. How could somebody not check into something like that? Like Azmi Bashara is drawing a salary and benefits when the guy is on the wanted list. I mean, think about that a moment. So who's running the show there? Who's running any show here?
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that goes on everywhere. It repeats itself every single day, several times a day.
Mm-hmm.
You heard it.
Yeah, absolutely. He's right.
But Rabbi Kahana would say, get up off your apathy. Right.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So, that's what we got. So let's get to the portion, because obviously everybody's waiting there, sitting at the edge of their seats, just waiting to hear about the very important portion of the Torah, Shoftim and Shotrim, judges and police You have to put it at your every gate. Obviously, why gates? Gates were the place where, in the time of in those days, all the commerce were at the gates of the city, and the judges would sit at the place of the commerce, where transaction, where most of the legal issues were related to transactions relating to commerce, selling and buying and so on. So they would sit at the gate, but they would also deal with criminal matters. But that's where the judges sat, and it says judges and police. Now, what's important here? The rabbis tell us that if there are no police, there are no judges. What does that mean? It says there has to be enforcement of the judicial decisions. You can't
Mhm.
you can't just make decisions and like we used to say, you get a judgment and nothing you can do with it but paste it on the wall. You have to
Mhm.
be able to enforce it, and without a proper police police system to enforce the law, enforce the judgments, um, it's just worthless. It's a waste of time to even have judges. So enforcement validates the judgments. And as I said before, you need police not only to enforce judgments, but they need to enforce the law. Okay, under Jewish law, under the Torah,
Mhm.
they did it before. So to enforce the law, right? We have coercion. We have this concept of everybody is free to is free to you know do what he wants when it comes to observing the Torah. That's not a Jewish concept. Jewish concept is uh, if and you can see that in the Rambam, including the Rambam, that if people didn't keep the law, they had the police. The police would check and see and make sure they're keeping the law. And if they didn't, in the public domain, obviously, they didn't go into people's houses, but in the public domain, they had the right to flog people to make sure that they're keeping the law. And so to say, like, in a real Jewish society, people wouldn't be allowed to go around and break the Shabbat, break the Sabbath, because they have some kind of freedom of religion. It doesn't exist
Right.
under a Torah society. It's illegal. It would be illegal to not keep the Shabbat in the public domain, and if people were caught, they would be properly, dealt with. And that was the whole idea, that there had to be enforcement of judicial decisions of the courts and of the law that was given from the Torah and the Talmud and so on. So that's the first aspect of this portion. The portion goes into something, probably I would say even more important, which is the appointment of a king. Right?
Yeah.
As we get further into the portion, we have the issue of appointing a king, and because this is a very interesting issue, because I was, back in the day, Yossi Dayan, who was,
Right.
he was a very active leader in the Kach movement, the Rabbi
Yep.
Kahana.
Yep.
I created a movement to restore the monarchy to the king, to the family of David. Yossi Dayan was a descendant of King David. He has the tree shows that he's 89th generation from King David.
Right. Right.
And we wanted to get the point across that democracy is not a Jewish form of government. First of all, it's a very bad system.
Right.
A lot of the people that are connected supposedly to the democratic system wrote terrible things about it, like Franklin, what's his name, Benjamin Franklin, and Rabbi Kahana wrote a book. His last book was called Referendum or Revolution.
Right.
It's a must-read book. It's a must-read book for anybody that really wants to understand what democracy really is and why it's such a bad system. And then, so in any event, there's a whole argument whether there's a commandment to appoint a king, or whether it's just a possibility, or is it something that we're allowed to do, or something we're
Right.
obligated to do? and it's because of the wording, the way the wording of the commandment, it says like this: says when it comes to pass, and the people decide we want to appoint a king, well then okay, then you have to appoint a king who is one of the people. He has to be from Jewish descent,
Right.
right?
Right.
He has to have all these. He has to, be worthy of being the king. So people want to understand from that the way it's worded. Well, okay, so we have an option. We have an option. If we want, we'll appoint a king, but we don't. We're not obligated to do that, and therefore, um, if there's a better form of government, we'll go with that instead of a king. Now, we know this to be a mistake because the Talmud tells us, and the Rambam brings it down as halacha, that there were three. You need help getting up?
No, I'm
Okay.
fine.
There were three commandments that we were given to perform when we enter the land. Okay, we enter the land. The first thing we have to do before I get to these three commandments, the first thing we have to do is fight the war to destroy the enemy. The enemies
Right.
of Israel, the 7 nations that didn't get up and leave. It was one nation got up and left. The Gergeshi went to Africa. The other 6 nations didn't leave. They didn't accept our terms of peace, and we went to war to destroy them. That was what we were obligated to do, because their enemies would think it's their land, and you can't have you can't allow people who think it's their land to live amongst you. So the Gergeshi ran away. There was a what we call the Givonim. For these Givonim, they made peace, although they did it in a deceptive way, but they made peace, and they were made water carriers and wood choppers for the king.
Right.
King or for the Kohanim. They would serve the
Yep.
Kohen. The other six nations didn't make peace and didn't run away, so we went to war with them. Unfortunately, Joshua, who led us into the land of Israel, didn't do his job and let a lot of them, even though it was a 7-year war, he should have been able to in 7 years, eradicate them. He didn't do the job.
Mhm.
So a lot of places that they were still, after 7 years were passed, they still were living in the land. And the book of Joshua and the book of Shoftim of Judges, which follows Joshua, deals with the problem of all the nations that were left living in the land. So in any event, so we said like this. So after the 7 years of conquering the land is the 7 years of settling the land, right? The tribes divided up the land.
Yep.
2.5 tribes were on the other side of the Jordan, and the other 9.5 tribes divided up the land. Obviously, the Levites didn't get a portion of the land, and took 7 years to divide up the land. And then we get to then now 14 years have passed. At this point, according to the Talmud, and according to the Rambam, that there was an obligation at this point to do 3 things. The first thing is appoint a king. In other words, Joshua and even Moshe before him, as greater leaders as they were not considered kings. The king, obviously, you have to anoint the king. Right? You can't just say, okay, well, you know what? He's a king because he's the leader. It doesn't work that way.
Yep.
You have to anoint the king. He has to be an act like we saw. How did Shaul get appointed king, and how did David get appointed king? The prophet Samuel had to go and seek them out and determine that they're the king of Israel and anoint them. So the first mitzvah anyhow was to appoint a king. The second one was to eradicate Amalek. Again, Amalek, whoever forgot who Amalek is, Amalek was the nation that attacked us in the desert after after we left Egypt and had all the miracles, and they attacked us in the desert, and we were given obligation to eradicate Amalek. Amalek is the symbol of true evil in the world. We believe that the Nazis, were from Amalek, and all the enemies of Israel are descendants of Amalek because, unfortunately, they were never eradicated totally. And then the third commandment, after we do that, we point to the king. The king then eradicates Amalek, and we saw that right away when Saul is appointed the first king of Israel. Right away, one of the first things he does is declares war on Amalek and goes to eradicate them. Unfortunately, he left the Amalekites alive and their sheep and goats. He wasn't supposed to leave any remnants of Amalek. He failed the job, and unfortunately, Amalek has been with us since. The power of Amalek. Story of Purim, of course, of Haman, and throughout history. So remember the story of the Nuremberg trials where they get hanged and they shout the Purim Fest and
Julius Streicher, right.
Okay, and now we get to the last commandment of the three is to build the temple. It's called Beit HaBchira, to build the house of that's been chosen, because we're never told in the Torah that Jerusalem is the place of the temple, and the Temple Mount is the place of the temple. We're never told that. We're never told exactly where it is. We have to seek it out. As we saw in last week's portion, we have a command to seek it out, find the place, and then build the temple there. So now this is what was supposed to be, and this is why it was so important to appoint a king, because obviously without the king, we don't have the leader to lead us to wipe out Amalek. We don't have the leader to lead us to build the temple. We're stuck. We're stuck in limbo, and that's what happened. Is the Jews were in the land of Israel for hundreds of years, and they did not appoint a king. We had the leaders of Israel, the political leadership, were the judges. We have the book of Judges, and it talks about all the judges. And the scripture, if you look at it, it has terrible. It rebukes us by saying at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, there is no king in Israel, and everybody does what they feel like. That's what it says. People do what they want because there's no king. Whereas the judges are a type of leadership that is very, very weak, and people like that. That's one of the reasons why the leftists here are fighting to keep the power of the judges. It's a very weak leadership. The judges don't lead us in battle. They're not going to enforce the law. They will have to rely on the police to enforce the law. Unlike the king, the king has the power himself to enforce the law. Somebody goes against the king, he's considered a rebel who could be put to death immediately. The king himself could just put him to death. So the king, appointment of a king is a very, very important facet of the Jewish system of government. And without that, we were stuck. So what happened is no king was appointed. And then there was no temple built in Jerusalem. We settled for a half tabernacle, half temple in Shiloh, which existed for 369 years. I mean, that's a long time. And that served as the place of the temple in Shiloh, which is obviously north of Jerusalem. And then after that, and then again, Amalek was not wiped out, and it only came to pass when finally, after about 400 years of being in the land, Saul was appointed king. Now, what happened? And it says, and one of the commentators says, what happened? Why did the Jews all of a sudden, took them 400 years, and they suddenly woke up and said, "No, we want a king." And they tell Samuel the prophet, "We want a king."
Yeah.
And so that's because they demanded a king. That's why they were given King Saul, and then of course King David, because King Saul failed to do his job. So one of the commentators, the Baal HaTurim, and also another commentator, the Malbim, both say that what happened is that the Jews were very influenced in the land of Israel by the Philistines. The Philistines lived on the sea, in the cities of Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, Gaza, all of these cities along the seashore, the Mediterranean. That's where they lived. and they were a terrible enemy of Israel. Constantly were at war with them, fighting with them. And um, in actuality, the original Philistines had been conquered by Greeks from the Greek islands, would come over and conquered them. And those Greeks, of course, where again the birthplace of democracy is Greece. They brought with them the form of government of democracy, and that's why Goliath, who was again a Philistine, right, who challenged the Jews, who's going to come and fight me? And no one stood up except King David, who wasn't king yet. He's the only one who stood up. And what was how did Goliath? Why did Goliath succeed to freeze the people? No one was willing to do anything. The Malbim explains. He says Goliath came and said, "Listen, we're a democracy. Okay, if I win the battle, then you people are just basically, have the rights like anybody else in the Greek society, in our Greek society, which is, the. But if Saul wins the battle, if the king Saul wins the battle, if the Jews win, you're going to continue being his slave because he's a king and you're just, slaves of the king." And he basically was able by saying that to them to thwart any kind of spirit to stand up against him until David came along, who obviously was the true king of Israel, and said, who's this Philistine to challenge challenge Hashem, the true king of the world, because King David, his kingship, his monarchy was really a reflection of the monarchy of Hashem, of God, and and that's why he was able to say, I don't care how big he is, I don't care how tough he is, Hashem's with me, and I'm going to defeat him. And I mean that battle there, and Rabbi Kahana used to love to write and talk about it because one of the things the rabbi says is that he'd come out every day, Goliath, I think it was like 40 days, and he'd say in the morning and the evening, when the Jews were going to say Shema Yisrael, and then he challenged them with these, and they weren't able to say the Shema Yisrael because how can you, on the one hand, say Shema Yisrael like you believe in God, right? Our true devotion to Hashem by saying the Shema Yisrael, and at the same time be afraid of Goliath, no matter how big he is and how tough he was. And it's only when David came along, right? He wasn't there this whole time. He comes along, and he sees this embarrassing situation happening, and nobody's doing anything. He couldn't understand what's going on, and then he stood up, and Saul offered him his all of his what do you call that, the metal shields and the armor and everything. He says, I don't need that. I need a few stones. I just need a couple of stones and my slingshot. I'll deal with it. Because obviously, if Hashem wants, the stones with the slingshot are going to do the job, no matter how much armor and whatever he had. And then ultimately, he knocks Goliath down and chops his head off, and takes Goliath's sword from him. And what we say is that he was B'kadesh Shem Hashem. He sanctified God's name by standing up to Goliath, this giant, and by doing that, then the Jews renewed their belief and trust and went to war with the Philistines, defeated them. But this was only due to the fact that we had a king. King David was already anointed, even though he wasn't recognized yet as the king, but he'd been anointed by Samuel. And remember, that story also is very important. Okay, is that what happens when Shmuel is told to go to the house of Yishai, and from there he's going to find the replacement for Saul. He goes to Yishai, and Yishai says, I have 7 sons, and he looks at all 7 of them, and he doesn't get the prophecy. He says that this one or that one is the king, and he says to him, you have any other sons? And he said, well, I do have one. He's out in the desert somewhere. He's a shepherd out in the desert, with his sheep, with his goats and sheep. Well, let me see who, and like Yishai had no inkling or belief that David is going to be the one, because they looked at him as being like some kind of, crazy hilltop youth kind of guy that's out there in
Yeah.
the desert with a shaking hat, fighting the enemies of Israel. And he sees him when finally Samuel sees him right away. He says, "That's the one." He's had the prophecy. That's the one. He's the king, and he anoints him. But he yet wasn't. Saul was still king, so he comes to the place of the battle, and he sees this sight that's unbelievable. What is wrong with these people? Why isn't anybody standing up to this guy? Doesn't anybody believe, trust in Hashem? And he sees that they don't have it, and he renews this spirit of faith and trust. And that's the bottom line. The bottom line is, do you have the faith and trust? Do you have the wherewithal to give of your soul, to be willing to give your soul? I mean, there was no guarantee that David was going to win, but he had the faith and trust. He took, as Rabbi would say, he took the weapon he knew how to use the best, which was the slingshot. He turned down all the armor and swords and javelins and whatever they had to offer, and he went to war. And he performed one of the greatest sanctifications of God's name in history, and became obviously worthy of the fact that he had been appointed king. So this is what this portion is very important, but unfortunately, it's constantly misunderstood and not properly accepted. The fact that it is a obligation to appoint a king, and unfortunately, the people I have the most arguments with on this issue is not the Haredim. It's the national religious Jews, who you would think would be the ones that would want to have a king. They're the ones who are totally opposed to have a king, and they use all kinds of different commentators and stuff to try to say, like the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel was a commentator in the time of, I think, of the what do you call it, the Spanish Inquisition. And he had served in the court of the king and queen during or before the Inquisition, and because he saw of how the monarchy acted, he was against the monarchy. So which you know what, that's not a good example. All right, so it could be that by the nations, the kings and queens become despots and they become dictators and whatnot, and they become evil.
Yeah.
But in the Jewish belief, in our belief, is that the king, we're told, has to have two Sefer Torahs. He has to walk around every day with a Torah scroll connected to his arm all day, tied to his arm like tefillin, and another one that he has in his house. He has to be constantly subservient to the Torah. And if he is, that's the way the Torah is going to be kept and enforced. I mean, obviously, a king has freedom of choice, and he can do bad things, like some of the kings did.
Yeah.
But the potential, this is the important thing, the potential to have a true, pure Jewish society, country, according to the Torah, is only possible when we have a king. This idea of having, I had recently, I was at Shabbat. There was a famous rabbi, Rema Kohen, who's from the settlement of Otniel, and he was talking about democracy and Torah, and I challenged him. I said, how would you ever expect to have a temple under democracy? He said, well, why? What's the problem? I said, the problem is that, you see, we've had a democracy for 75 years here. We have no temple. We're not even close to having it. And I don't see how it could even happen under a democracy where, like you pointed out, the Knesset members are Arabs who were enemies of Israel. And
they're going to vote. They're going to vote.
Yeah. They're gonna. Yeah, Yossi Dan used to joke about that. He says, "Yeah, we're going to make a committee, and Azmi Bashara and Ahmad Tibi are going to be the ones in charge of building the temple."
Of the temple.
Yes, unbelievable. I mean, insanity to think such a thing. But I'll tell you something. Seeing some of these Jewish Knesset members, you have a better chance under the Arabs, maybe, of having a temple than with these guys. I mean, look at this. We're here now. We're on the western side. Okay, we see here.
Yeah.
Now look. Usually they let us up to the stairs. This is
Yep.
the first time now in a long time. I don't remember the last time it was that they kept us away from the stairs. This is
Right.
under the Ben-Gvir Netanyahu government, the so-called right-wing government. That
Right.
here, let's just here. Let's get the police. Let's just ask the police in charge right here. תגיד, למה אנחנו לא מתקרבים? מי נתן את ההוראה לא להתקרב? לא, אנחנו תמיד עד לשם. אתה החלטת, מי החליט? אתה או מישהו מעליך? לא פרובוקציה, אני רוצה, תראה, אני עורך דין, ואני רוצה את הפרטים שלך, אם זה החלטה שלך, נברר את זה.
א' כל אתה תקבל.
אוקיי, אז תוריד את זה.
דבר ראשון, בוא נראה.
בוא תוריד את זה. אוקיי. אז
דבר ראשון, בוא נראה.
אנחנו נברר, מי החליט?
איך אתה מרגיש?
אני מחליט מצוין, אבל אני ארגיש יותר טוב אם אני אעמוד שמה. לא, אל תעשה,
אתה ממש רוצה לעמוד שם?
כן, אני רוצה לעמוד שמה.
אתה תגיע לשם.
אוקיי,
בסדר,
בוא
אבל
נ-
תמתין שנייה. אני אדבר קודם כל עם הקצין שלי, ואז נגיע להחלטה. טוב?
בסדר.
בכיף אדוני.
Okay. So now we're going to find out who gave the order not to allow us over there. He's calling up his officer, and we'll see what the deal is. Maybe it's from Ben-Gvir. Maybe, is the Ben-Gvir like that? It's unbelievable. It's like, you know, they give us such little, so you know, and the little they give us, they take away
Right.
arbitrarily. So we're waiting now. Obviously, they're going to the high echelons. You know, the
Yes.
amazing thing is that you don't see any Arabs around here whatsoever. Anyone near us that's bothered, that's making any kind of. There's no fear of some kind of you know, a riot or you know.
Right.
It's interesting. Let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens here. Wait, no, the word is coming down.
חבר'ה, מישהו רוצה להתקדם עוד טיפה?
כן, כולנו רוצים.
לא כולם.
כן, כן.
כמו שמאחורה.
Yeah, we go. We got the order came down. Now we're moving closer. See, all you got to do is challenge them. Unfortunately, we're so used to being pushed around that people just take it and don't do anything. You know.
Yep.
Hey, here's Shimon. Shimon, come on, give us some words of wisdom here.
Hey, okay.
Parsha Shoftim.
First, I want to say today is there's a lot of light going on. We're Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, and we had a strong group today, and you know we're still feeling the struggle, but there's definitely there's a lot happening on the mountain right now. A lot of Torah roots, you know. There's a lot of awakening. So I was looking at the Tehillim we say after Kriyat Torah, the David Mizmor. And over there, it says, "Who's going to go up on the mountain? Who has the merit to come up here?" So it's very simple. It says in the pasuk that it is the pure of heart, and also those who don't lie. Those are the two qualities of the people that have the merit to come up here. They have to be clean, they have to be pure of heart, and they have to not lie. And that's easier said than done. You know, like the idea of shochat, bribery, right? It causes even the most righteous of people to lie a little bit to themselves, which is why it's such a important thing that judges are not connected to bribery whatsoever. But it's not only judges. Every individual walking around is a judge. We're judging everything constantly. So to the degree that we do not take any kind of bribery, whether monetary or honor, is the degree that we have a hold on truth. And those midot, that purity of the heart, that's what's, and the cleanliness of not taking bribes and having that truth, that is what is allowing us to move forward, because it's contagious. That's really our essence. The Jewish essence is that. And the more Jews get a hold of those midot, right? The more attractive to be like that it is to other Jews. And that's what's happening here on the mountain. More and more people are coming up, and you see, it's a testament to that they have these midot. It's a testament, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to come up.
Wow. There you have it.
Excellent.
Our favorite Kohen, Shimon.
Excellent.
And we went over the time limit, but I think it was important. Parsha
Yeah.
portion, so you're dealing with judges, the police, and kings, and so on. Mayor, why don't you wrap it up
Absolutely.
for us?
You know what I was thinking? As we're getting closer to the Chagim, the high holidays, perhaps, I could put the word out on social media, since we're doing this every week, that if anyone wants a Mishnah for maybe a family member or something, that on Har Bayit, you could keep them in mind, the names of people, of
Absolutely.
Jews.
People that need a blessing, people that need, people that are sick and need blessing of health, or a blessing of prosperity, or a blessing to get married, to find their second half, or whatever
Yep.
is needed. Sure.
Absolutely.
I remember a few
Great.
weeks ago we were up here, and Yehuda Glick was here with a whole list of people.
Mhm.
Where's the remnants of that?
Tremendous.
Oh,
Like
it's
a
back
row of
there.
rocks. It's back over there,
Yeah.
right? Wait, it's like right below the steps.
Yeah.
Right below the steps. A few meters.
So there we go. We're on our way out. Another
Okay.
successful trip, and we had there just a proof. The important thing is I was able to prove that all that he requires is that you stand up for our rights. Whatever little rights they give us, we certainly shouldn't concede to them anything that
Right.
we've achieved. And now, because somebody made a arbitrary decision, everybody's like falls into line. That's not who we are. Okay, we're students
Right.
around by Kahana, and we have to stand up for our rights. And on that note,
And we're documenting it. We are filming it. So your interaction with that police officer, it's filmed. So there's a record of it. And they have to know that.
here we have everybody
Well,
dancing
thank-
over here. All right,
Yep. Mark, thank you very much.
all right.
And we'll do next week's Parsha. Thank you.
Okay. All right. See you next week.
Excellent. Yep. Bye-bye.